discuss border security and the future in Arizona is Representative Andy Biggs. Congressman, thank you so much for joining Save the Nation. And I have to add, also the chairman of the House Freedom Caucus, an incredible group in Congress.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Good to be with you. Thanks for all you guys do.
So first, to start off, I just got to ask you about the Vice President, Kamala Harris. She still has yet, she's in charge of the border crisis now. She has yet to actually visit in person. As someone who represents a border state, what does that mean to you?
Well, it means that she doesn't really care about what's going on. She doesn't want to know the truth. But I think, Adam, let's just face the facts. We all know it's a disaster down there. She doesn't want to be down there because she doesn't want her picture taken with a disaster. So she'll go to Guatemala. She'll go to the northern border. She's going to go to Mexico City. But she's not going to go down to anywhere along the border because it would cause the left-stream media, which is ignoring this crisis, to actually film her down at the border.
So it's kind of odd then that President Biden even gave her this job in the first place if she didn't want it. Does that mean that maybe people in the White House aren't talking to each other right now?
So, you know, I'm not sure Joe Biden's in charge of anything right now. I think there might be a small oligarchy that's running the country right now.
So as someone, as I mentioned, who represents down in Arizona, how do people in the state feel about this crisis? Because you're the ones who you're seeing the body bags, you're seeing the drugs that are coming in, you're hearing about the violence that's being covered in your media every day.
Yeah, it is a top issue in my state. It's right at the top, and we see it, we feel it. You know, we've got hotels that are being rented out by NGOs that are housing people that are here illegally, that are being transitioned into the country. So we see it at the airport every day, every time I fly, which is often. We see folks being transported all over the country. So it is real, palpable, and people are not happy.
So if Vice President Harris picked up the phone and called you today, what advice would you give her about how to solve this problem?
There are 6 things you can do. I'll go real fast. Number 1, the president has to stand up and say, don't come. We're not going to let you in. Number 2, reinstate the Remain in Mexico policy. Number 3, reinstate the other 12 international agreements, including with the Northern Triangle states. Number 4, stop giving $1,400 to every illegal alien under the CARES Act. Number 5, go back and finish the fencing because we have material. Let's just finish it. And the last thing is move your immigration judges to the border. These people are all claiming amnesty. Forget about the backlog, which is I don't know how many millions of people. Just start doing the amnesty current, give them their due process because over 90% of them are found to have an invalid amnesty claim, or excuse me, asylum claim. And so then you can move them back home to their home state. You do that within 2 or 3 weeks, I guarantee you, the border's under control.
But what happens right now is you get a little piece of paper. It says, please come back in, what, a year, 2 years, 3 years, and then you just disappear into the country.
Yeah, or else they'll give you a phone number and they'll say, when you get settled in wherever you're going, please call ICE within 60 days. I'm not kidding you. So you either get the notice to appear, which is what you described, or you get a piece of paper to call ICE. How many of those people call?
So down a few states over, Texas, Governor Abbott, he's making some noise about potentially using state funds to go and start finishing the wall and maybe doing some border construction. Is that appropriate for states to start taking over this federal job?
Well, this, by all rights, the federal government should be doing that. But if they're not, I understand that the crisis is so acute, particularly in Texas and Arizona, that maybe that's what the states will do. You know, Arizona's got a problem because most of our border is going to be it's owned by federal lands and public lands, so we have a different response than Texas.
So I have to ask you also about Arizona. From people across the country, they've seen Republicans get elected in Arizona, then they see Democratic senators there now. What kind of state is it? Was it a red state? Is it a blue state? Is it a purple state? What's actually happening on the ground there politically?
Well, on the ground, I would say we're still a center-right state, which means that the Republicans can win those seats. We just need to do a better job, and hopefully the redistricting will give us a fair break because. That's really been a hindrance to us.
And you're picking up a seat, correct?
Well, we should have picked up a seat. If you lose December numbers, we would, but under the last census, we're not going to get a new seat.
Even though we see everyone in the world moving to Arizona, it seems.
Exactly. It was a kick in the gut, quite frankly, that we didn't pick up a new seat. We have enough we'll be some of the biggest congressional districts in the country.
All right. Well, there's a lot to see. You got a big governor's race and a big Senate race.
Life is about interacting, and now we get back to living life. Those were the words of New York Governor Andrew Cuomo this past week as he announced the reopening of an Empire State needlessly bludgeoned by lockdowns. How do we know this? We do because the virus has been spreading for months in crisis-free fashion before Cuomo's mid-March decision to take away the freedom of some of the world's most talented, innovative, and creative people. Crisis is always the consequence when you replace the marketplace that is the people with political force. About New York City, writer Ken Auletta once observed that for those with talent, this city is the final test. In 2020, the talented were told their work, opinions, and zest for life no longer mattered, that the very individuals so instrumental in all human progress were a lethal menace to one another. What was formerly a crowded city bustling with the energetic and ambitious was suddenly empty. The businesses, restaurants, and culture that make New York shuddered. Too bad Cuomo didn't see the error of his ways 15 months ago. Indeed, to listen to him now is to listen to what freedom lovers were saying in March of 2020. Life is most definitely about thriving, about seeing people, about loving, about celebrating, about enjoying, and most of all about interacting. Yet all of what makes life worth living was taken on the assumption that lovers of life viewed their own as so worthless that they would carelessly risk it as a virus spread. The arrogance of Cuomo and the political class was stunning. It still is now. Cuomo acts as though he didn't do what he did. Let's not let him forget what he did. We owe it to history to make sure he's tied to easily the worst economic and human rights tragedy of the still young 21st century. Here to discuss New York's governor is criminal defense attorney, former New Yorker, and all-around left-wing lockdown skeptic, Jeanine Younes. Jeanine, welcome to Save the Nation.
Thank you so much for having me, John.
Now, as mentioned in my introduction of you, your politics aren't mine, nor are they the politics of many watching. Yet you've been a vocal and articulate critic of the lockdown since day one. Tell us why.
Well, I believe that the lockdowns entail serious civil liberties violations. I don't think that the government should have the right to tell us that we can't leave our homes, that we can't earn a living, that we can't send our kids to school. I think that these measures particularly hurt the poor and working class, and for that reason, I've been opposed to them since the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Now, you lived in New York as the lockdowns began. Now, please give us a feel for the profoundly negative impact they had on the city, along with the vibe in the city as what was once loud and joyous essentially went quiet.
Yeah, it was really disturbing. It felt like a dystopian movie or something. Everybody was panicked, staying in their homes. I actually left. I went to Cape Cod for a couple of months, so I wasn't there. But I came back in May, and everything was closed. There was nothing to do. There was just this really sort of desolate feeling, almost as though the city had been ruined. And that went on. That persisted for months and months. There was a brief reprieve in the summer, and when it got cold and cases started to uptick again, Cuomo started shutting things down again. And it felt like that again through the winter.
Mm-hmm. Now, where do you think we go from here? You've since, of course, exited New York, as I mentioned. What's your view for how we can make sure that what was mindless and cruel and sickeningly mean to those with the least will never happen again?
I'm worried it's going to happen again. So I think that lawsuits, I'm a lawyer, and I actually joined a civil liberties law firm called New Civil Liberties Alliance in Washington, D.C. That's why I moved out of New York. In order to do just that, I think we need to create precedent now, and we can still do that. For instance, a Florida court just decided a mask case, a really good decision, saying that mask mandates violates the Florida Constitution's right to privacy. And that was after the mask mandate ended. So we can still bring lawsuits and hopefully establish good precedent for the future. I think that's one way. And the other thing that needs to happen is that people need to realize it's a colossal mistake, that we panicked and we did this for no good reason. It didn't help, and it harmed millions and millions of people in this country, not to mention the world.
It's so true. The global impact of this tragedy is endless, and we'll be feeling it for decades. Jeanine, it's been so great working with you for months on this subject. Thank you for all that you did. I can't imagine where we'd be without people like you.
Representative and United States congressional candidate Anthony Sabatini launched numerous lawsuits against Florida counties in 2020. Here with us today is the man himself, Anthony Sabatini, to discuss why he sued and what this new ruling means for Florida residents. Anthony, thank you so much for joining us today on Save the Nation.
Thanks for having me on.
So first question, What did these mask mandates originally entail for Florida residents?
Well, I think they're a horrible misstep by government. They were sold as a solution to slowing or even stopping the spread of coronavirus. There was no scientific evidence for that. But I think more importantly, they were a way for government to sort of enlarge its role and encroach in the personal lives of people. It was the first time, actually, in American history that governments and local governments began the process of criminalizing or assigning civil fines to people for not wearing safety equipment in public spaces. So it was a really bad step for government that was becoming normalized. So we fought them from the first day, suing 15 different cities and counties throughout the state, because I knew the precedent that would be set through the mask mandates would be really, really horrible going forward. You're going to see government, I think, try to issue mandates for all sorts of things if this becomes normalized. So we fought it hand, tooth, and nail.
So what did you hope to accomplish by taking this sort of legal action?
Well, we obviously wanted them to go away. We wanted people to be able to make their own decisions with their own bodies and let private business owners come up with the rules and regulations for their own property, because we trust people. We trust people to look at the data that was being provided by agencies and in the public space and say, that they can make their own informed decisions for themselves. And so that's why we filed them, was to try to, get injunctions to strike them down in court.
Now, there's a new ruling from the court. Did this work out in your favor, or what does this mean for Florida?
Well, trial judges were very skeptical of the lawsuits. They didn't want to tell government that they were wrong. They didn't want to strike down supposedly government laws based in safety and the protection of people during a pandemic, despite the lack of scientific evidence showing that masks were actually not only were they doing nothing to slow down coronavirus, but actually there was evidence to show that the misuse of masks contributed to the spread of virus, and we saw that around the world. So the trial judges generally ruled against us in the beginning, but on appeal, took 9 months, but the wheels of justice were slow. An appellate court in a 2-1 decision said that these mask mandates violated Florida's privacy clause in its state constitution, which almost every state constitution and the federal constitution have either explicit law or case law describing a right to privacy. And this mask mandate violated that, is what the court found. So, there were judges saying your privacy rights are violated if there was a law prohibiting an abortion, but somehow your privacy rights were not violated with these mask mandates, even though my body, my choice was basically the case law in the abortion cases. So it felt good to see a court actually apply that precedent, which I don't like the abortion precedent, but if that's the precedent they're going to go with, it should be applied to any time the government wants to restrict what a person can do with their body, and we won. So,
now you and I are both fans of individual liberty. So, what sort of precedent did these mask mandates set in terms of threatening individual liberty in the future?
CDC and what these unaccountable agencies and what local governments were able to do and state governments were able to do is to assert the government into a situation where they're in charge of what you can do. What you can do with your body, what you have to wear, et cetera, when, before this occurred, they had never done before. So they've normalized this new role of government, and that's a really bad thing to happen, because now anytime there's any threat in society, governments can immediately insert itself instead of allowing free individuals to make decisions for themselves. So even though we won, it still created a really bad precedent in the minds of Americans. So we need to fight that continually.
Absolutely. So in about 30 seconds or less, what's next in the fight for liberty in Florida or even on a broader national scale?
Well, we've been fighting the vaccine passports. We've been fighting the idea of any kind of mandate or punishment related to the pandemic. But, we're going to see school boards and other local government entities continue to find ways to just interfere with the lives of individuals through, firing people who don't want to be vaccinated. Or, some of these cities are so liberal, they want basically a permanent mask mandate. So we're going to continue the fight and be ready for the next thing. Who knows what the next emergency is going to be, where government wants to assert itself in our lives again. We'll be ready, though.
Absolutely. Well, we'll be ready. Thank you so much, Anthony Sabatini.
Thanks for
Here to speak with us on his take on Juneteenth and how it should be recognized is Minister and FreedomWorks Senior Fellow, Reverend C.L. Bryant. C.L., thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me on, Adam. Always glad to be with you. When we think about Juneteenth and this day that has now been commemorated in American history for now and always, we must remember that when Major General Gordon Granger marched into Galveston, Texas, then he had both with him white and black soldiers. This was an example of what America should be back in 1865. And it amazes me, Adam, how we're still fighting the same battles that they had actually began to overcome at that point in time. And it's strange how it seems we are reveling in that type of activity, of racial division.
Well, I want to get to that, but first, can you just clarify for our viewers, like, what is this holiday? What was it commemorating?
This holiday is to commemorate a proclamation being announced to slaves in Texas that they had been free for 2 years. And they, of course, didn't realize that. And I always like to point out to people when they saw Black Union soldiers in uniform, when they saw those men in uniform, I believe that this was something incredibly monumental that we as Americans should recognize, but not use as a tool to divide. This should be a time in America when we can understand that the white men also who gave their lives for freedom and liberty of Black men, and then the saving of the republic and the defense of people in various states and their rights. These are topics that are still pertinent in America and to America, and we certainly need to honor that. But we must not take a day of liberation and turn it into, as you were saying, a day of politicalization.
So, CL, when I was a child, I was raised and taught the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr., that we should judge people based on the content of their character, not their skin color. And sometimes I'm feeling like today we're moving away from that message, and now we're being told to focus on race first. Is that happening?
The valor that was paid for you and I, Adam, you from Ohio, I'm from Louisiana. In fact, we could actually be a picture of what was happening in Galveston, Texas. Mm-hmm. Yes, what is going on is the actual reverse of what Dr. King had in mind for an American future. And what we saw standing there in Galveston was the exact projection of what would become Martin Luther King, not being judged by the content of character, but not being judged by color of skin, rather, but being judged by content of character. Think of the character that it took for men who had never met a slave to go and fight in a war that was primarily, in their thinking, to free slaves. Think of what it might have meant to those who had been slaves to see Black men who looked like them come and liberate them. It was a picture of what America could be, can be, and is. Regardless of what anyone says, Adam, America is that great and shining city on a hill that liberates all men, even still today.
So, CL, I got to ask you, so going forward, now that we have this national holiday, how should people be celebrating Juneteenth going forward?
I think to celebrate Juneteenth, we all should have one big American picnic. It's Juneteenth, the holiday right before the 4th of July. I think if we're going to do it, let's have a over a month-long celebration of our American freedom. If we're going to do it, let it culminate on the 4th of July with the fireworks that bring us all together, the honoring of the American flag and the American soldier who actually made Juneteenth possible when they marched into Galveston, Texas with Major General Granger and freed those who had been held captive.
All right, CL. Well, listen, it's always a pleasure, and I appreciate your take, and you have a good Father's Day, all right?
Same to you, my good friend. Happy New Father's Day to you.
All right. Don't the nation.
Great to be with you, Adam.
Now, earlier this week, you voted against these ESG requirements, environmental, social governance. Why? Why did you vote against it?
Well, it was a litany of increased reporting requirements on companies. You know, I got to tell you something. One of my heroes used to say, Ron Paul. He said they asked him, "Did you read these 1,000-page bills when you were in there?" And he said, "Actually, I got to the first or second page and found something unconstitutional, and I didn't read."
And that was it.
And there were enough reasons on page 1 of this bill to vote no. But this is a disturbing trend. When the Democrats took the majority, one of the first things they did is they renamed a committee that I was serving on. They renamed it from the Oversight and Government Reform Committee to the Oversight and Reform Committee. They don't want to reform government. They want to reform you and your companies. They want to get into private business and private lives.
And what's scary for me is when I start seeing public companies now getting a little bit more involved in politics, because that merger between big business and big government, no good can come from that.
And that merger's always been there under the currents here in Washington, D.C., but now they're bold. They're bold about it. They're going out and taking the message to the people.
So for a lot of private companies, if you're not going to meet these criteria, there is no chance you're going to get any kind of government business. And with so much big business trying to play well with Washington, this is changing how capitalism is going to work in this country.
Well, yeah, there's going to be a two-tier system. If you have the resources to comply with these regulations, by the way, some companies will love these regulations. The big companies will. They'll hire a compliance officer and write these reports every day. And that would just kill a mom and pop store. If you're going to have a local meat processing plant or a grocery store, can you imagine you have to do these things? And they always start out by saying, oh, we'll have a small business exemption to some of these requirements. But just like with Obamacare, the small business exemption did one thing. It kept small businesses small.
A late businessman who passed away a year ago or so, he once told me the reason he supported my organization, Freedom Works, is he wanted people to have the same opportunities to grow business that he was able to have. And he said with some of the new guidelines, he can't. There's all these compliance officers he's hiring. And he's saying these are $200,000, $250,000 a year salaries that do nothing for the bottom line of the company. So I want to ask you about this. There's kind of a new emerging IRS scandal that's happening with the IRS putting out a lot of very wealthy people's personal data. Your take on that? I mean, should we be scared of people in the IRS being politically motivated here?
Somebody needs prosecuted for that. I mean, it's against the law. The problem is the U.S. attorneys and the DOJ, they have no interest in prosecuting these people. I was on the oversight committee when we called Lois Lerner in, and she took the fifth. And now she's retired comfortably on your tax dollars. And she was never held to account. So it sends a bad message when laws are broken and nobody's held to account for this. And people say, well, why doesn't Congress do that? Well, we found Lois Lerner in contempt. We found Eric Holder in contempt. But when we refer this to the DOJ and the U.S. attorneys, they won't prosecute it. And that's not our branch of government. Now, we could do something. We could start defunding these organizations. But my colleagues on the Republican side, don't have the stomach for that.
Well, what I'm worried about with this IRS scandal is if this isn't investigated, this is just going to embolden further action. So if someone is politicized and they don't like what you said, or all of a sudden your tax returns are going to be leaked to some paper, to some reporter.
So let's just abolish the IRS.
Oh, well, I can join you on that one. That's a good idea. So you have been in the news quite a bit lately for both in hearings and in public statements. You've really been taking a lot of people to task on COVID and the government's response. You've been calling for not just for firing one or two folks, but complete overhauls,
yes,
to say the least.
There's a scandal. There's a big scandal. The CDC is covering up data, misrepresenting data. I talked to the CDC director here in Washington, D.C., recorded the phone call, and she admitted to me that they had misrepresented the Pfizer trial data by saying that it would help people who've already had the COVID infection if they got the vaccine, that the trial data showed that. And I pointed out the trial data to her, and I said, it doesn't show that. And they said, oh, you're right, we'll change that on the website. They never changed it. This is a scandal, and here we are over a year into this pandemic, and people are still trying to say, we don't know how long natural immunity will last. It may only last 3 months. I had COVID about 15 months ago, and I'm likely to never get it again. If I did, it would be asymptomatic and not a serious infection, and that's the case for everybody who's already had COVID. But they're covering that up, and I hate to impugn their motives. Let's impugn some motives. Okay, please go ahead and impugn motives. Okay. Okay. So the nicest interpretation I can come up with is they are telling everybody to take the vaccine, regardless of whether it helped them or not, because they think you're too stupid to know whether you've already had the virus. They're afraid that people who had a sniffle or a cold but didn't have the virus will say, oh, I'm not going to get the vaccine because I've already had the virus. Well, that's a problem with government. They just assume you're ignorant. People are not stupid. They can go to their own doctors. They don't need the CDC to be their nanny and tell them to get a vaccine that may not even provide them benefit if they've already had an infection.
And there seems to be a lot of virtue signaling. I know some reporters were getting on you. Did you take your vaccine? Did you take your vaccine?
And no, I haven't, because I've already had the virus. There's no outcomes-based study on the planet in any country that shows the vaccine helps you if you've already had the virus. Now, I'm not saying go out and get the virus so you don't have to get the vaccine. No, if you got a choice, take the vaccine. Don't take the virus. I mean, especially if you're in a high-risk category. If you're young, if you're a kid watching this show, I don't know why kids would watch a show with Adam Brandon and some old congressman, but don't take the vaccine. You're not at risk. And it's frankly not been tested on younger children yet.
But that is, so my wife, who's breastfeeding right now, she doesn't want to do it because she's worried about, what the effect on the child would be.
Yeah, I would not take the vaccine in that case.
So, not
that I ever plan on breastfeeding.
Well, that's
so this is your wife's decision, not mine. But in all cases, that's the case. The government shouldn't be making these decisions. If there's any risk whatsoever, it has to be a personal decision. Weigh that yourself, because there's only one person who is going to take care of you after the outcomes from that happen, and that's yourself.
So talking about this, though, this whole concept of being responsible, like the IRS is not being responsible for its leaks. And so, yes, is this why you're calling for people to get fired over at NIH and the rest of it so that we actually have accountability? Because I'm scared if we don't have any accountability, in a couple of years, we're going to be back at another pandemic.
Fauci needs fired. He's bungled this thing from the beginning. He has contradicted himself time after time. He doesn't follow the science. He's admitted that he changes his answer based on public perception. He literally said that in the context of herd immunity. The guy needs fired, and we need to audit what he was funding at NIAID. So that's what our Fire Fauci bill does. We're picking up steam on that. By the way, I got fined by Nancy Pelosi for going to the floor without a mask on.
Right.
And which I think is ridiculous. There were 10 of us. The next week, she dropped the mask mandate. It's just not tenable. She was trying to say everybody has to wear a mask or get vaccinated. That's a problem. I don't think the heavy hand of government should tell private businesses what to do. But at the same time, if my employer told me I had to wear a mask or get a vaccine, I'd walk out the door. I know it's tough for people who can't afford to do that, but I think we kind of need a national strike, like 10 of us did on the floor of the House, to break the will of these overlords, whether they are your boss trying to get into your business or whether it's the government trying to get in your business.
All right. Well, Congressman, we're here today to discuss